Whee! Hi there, friends! How are you doing? I've been doing pretty well, actually. With this video, I am really getting my groove on with provocative titles. Also, you probably don't recognize me based on my last video. That is the power of makeup for you, right there. I'm so sporty today. I'm so sporty! Woo! So, if you didn't see my last video, go check out what I look like in my non-makeup I don't give a state. You might be shocked. Now, this one is a video that I really wanted to do before I do any other videos, especially videos about my opinions or about anything for that matter, because it's really the basis and the underlying thought to all my upcoming videos that I want to keep on this channel. I really want to be clear about how I process other people's opinions until I start broadcasting my own opinions in here. And if anyone ever comments on these videos, I really want to keep an atmosphere in the comment section that allows anyone to comment honestly and also have you know that I am okay with your opinions and actually very welcoming of discussion on my channel. So, in today's world, with the social media and everything, people's opinions are kind of really exposed and out in the open because it's so much easier for people to be honest and open about their opinions when they can hide behind an account, myself included. Also, with social media platforms, information travels very quickly and all of us can be creators, evaluators, and distributors of the media, which is of course awesome in the sense that as opposed to like a few decades ago, we are no longer just receivers of information coming from this one-sided form of media, but the general public can now be very openly critical towards information and have a quite direct dialogue with the mass media and the people in charge even. But on the other hand, this new form of communication and exposed opinions also causes lots and lots of hate and really heated emotions amongst people, myself included. I'm pretty sure all of us have one time or two gotten lost in the social media comment sections where there's just endless back and forth throwing of mean comments that escalate into death threats and such. And it's kind of understandable since the nature of our time is that we are inevitably upon huge changes and possible disastrous scenarios. So of course everyone has formed their own opinions and can feel very strongly about things that can completely change all of our lives. Now, I used to be one of the people commenting and feeling very strongly about certain things and getting really mad for some people for feeling the opposing way. When I first found out this new information about, say, climate change and veganism, I was really stunned to notice that not everyone thought that this was the most important thing in the world like I did. And it really kind of depressed me and even made me think that some people are just evil and that I know better, basically. All of this started to slowly change when I underwent 2 years of therapy. Reflecting on my past and the reasons for my current behavior in the smallest of detail, and with analyzing everything in my life that had gone by as much as possible, really made me realize that our background and everything that has happened in all of our lives, and the tiniest things that we are exposed to, can completely change our behavior and our opinions eventually. We of course have the biological fundamentals that are the basis of how we become as a person, but the rest is kind of just a makeup of our surroundings and life events that eventually becomes our reality. Realizing this thing and really getting to know myself was kind of the beginning of me starting to accept and forgive everyone about their opinions. Understanding that all of us completely act based on our past experiences just gave me this tremendous feeling of relief that actually probably very few people are just profoundly bad and we all just kind of have our own differently formed opinions and thoughts about what is right and wrong. And that made me look at all different kinds of people in this new positive way, which was great. Because we're all kind of lost in here at the end of the day in the world and don't even necessarily pay attention to why we are thinking and acting the way that we do act and think. It's so much easier just to look at other people and judge their thinking and acts than actually let go of your own pride and look at your own thoughts and acts critically. One other thing that I learned in therapy is that none of us actually know anything about anything. Just looking into my own behavior, I only got into a measly start in 2 years in trying to understand what is happening inside my own brain. So understanding the reasons and thinking of 7.6+ billion people, let alone the relations between all of these people, let alone the rest of the universe's functions, is just something that not even the smartest of us can do in a human lifespan. Plus, everything that currently is constantly changing. So yeah, we know absolutely nothing about anything. So probably our best bet would be trying to understand more from the surrounding people, and especially ourselves, rather than just violently sticking to our truth and thinking that it is the only possible one. Which of course doesn't mean that you shouldn't have opinions at all, or fight about things that you think are right. But if you really want to change people's behavior and actually make them think, the best thing to do would probably always be to lead by your own example, and without shoving things on people's faces and without accusing them. If you do talk about your own opinions out loud, the only way the other person will absorb and objectively process what you're saying is if you respect the other person. Would you listen or take seriously anyone who just thinks you're stupid and fundamentally wrong in your thinking? Of course not, because you have years and years of past life and experiences to be thinking exactly the way that you are right now. So what I'm saying is, I understand. I don't judge. Some of your opinions might feel hurtful for me, like say racism, and I definitely don't accept it, but I get that some people are angry when deep down they are just afraid of unknown stuff. And to finally wrap this up, us people are actually very selfish and proud beings. I know I definitely am. And we will not change our opinions only if someone tells us to, because we always need to think that we have come up with every idea ourselves. But if someone is angry at your opinions or anyone's, don't get offended. Feel sorry for that person, because they are the ones that have the hardest time and have alienated themselves from you and other people, thinking that we are somehow fundamentally different and that we should be fighting. And that is just not true. Okay, so that's enough for today. If you like this video, leave a like and comment down below if this raises some questions or thoughts in you. I would be very happy to hear your thoughts. And of course, subscribe if you are interested in what I will be coming up with in the next video. It really could be anything. So now I will be going for a run in my full face of makeup. Bye!